This is your first NSAID report for spring 80 AN 2026. We have much ground to cover. For a bit of information on the cut-up method as our protocol dictates, and a much more brief example of the method at work, kindly see yourself to NSAID report 000. I'll skip further pheasantries and refox us right on the subject at hand. I have taken great care to be thorough and organized in the process of applying meaning to these cut words. We will be making several translation passes through the text, each with a particular purpose in mind. This is how we will layer our meaning together, like you read your Talmud. First pass is largely etymological, presenting possible meanings, even if they might seem unrelated or unlikely, meanings of words, phrases, or even fragments or letters or artifacts on the page. All details become relevant in this stage. We'll make rather extensive use of footnotes here. Second, we will explore broader subjects invoked by the text. What does Mount Vernon mean? What seems relevant to us about that? What might it stand for, or stand in for? What might it triangulate? This be the domain of swollen appendices. Third, we'll begin to interpret and paraphrase given what we find, condensing what we can and assembling the format into what seems to be relevant speakers and voices. The final step is to render this translation into something that can evoke these multiple contexts to be perceived more or less at once, with the prior information swimming in the subconscious. Why? God damn it, stop asking that. This instance formed 3 distinct sections, and they appear to be textually different, kind of self-distinguishing. I'll be covering each section entirely, that is to say, we'll do first and second translations to section 1, then covering section 2 and 3 the same way, and then we'll do the final presentation all at once. As always, I am intensely interested in your own interpretations. To keep this recording manageable, we have posted a video reading the entirety of the uncut source text and the cut text without commentary. I'll explain all the connections I'm making in this report and give context for what the source text is about, so you don't have to watch that to get something out of this, but it's there for anyone mad enough to want all of it. And of course, all the documentation is on our website, theearthhotel.org. We'll also publish the final dramatic translation on its own, just to see if we can get some quality cold readings from it. And lastly, I must say that I do know the difference between simple coincidence, like a line, and something more triangular. One must learn to rule out simple coincidence after following it properly to terminus. But one must follow through to the end to find out. There may be principles at work somewhere in between spaces, and there's always a space between. Source text. Editorial article from the Antiquarian, a monthly magazine for the collector of antiques, works of art, and rarities. Volume 17, Number 2. Published in New York, London, Paris, Berlin, August 1931. I acquired this page from a friend cleaning out old oddities in Avondale. That was back in 2014. Notes read first Birmingham cut-up, so right as I got to town. Local notes date it to either August or September. I've carried this uninterpreted text around with me for over a decade, put it on the wall, put it in a musical, but never interpreted the text as a whole. I'm not sure what happened to the rest of the original item that I cut from, but many thanks to the eBay vendor who sold another copy to me after tracking down the correct issue of this 95-year-old magazine. It's not online because some rich asshole bought a dog painting and withheld the rights. Rotten fink. The article is Comment and Correspondence by editor Alfred M. Frankfurter, largely concerning the cover art for the August issue, Full Cry by Richard Barrett Davis, and the appearance of a full-size replica of Mount Vernon, the home and plantation owned by George Washington and his family at the 1931 Colonial Exhibition in Paris, one of many events which later came to be known as a World's Fair. At times in this report we'll discuss some heavy topics, so if those two things didn't already put your antennae up for trouble, I'll give a heads up before I get into them.
What?
a Barosian cut-up experiment with trigger warnings. If anybody needed more trigger discipline, it was that guy. The text was again randomly, intuitively, without trying to do anything with the words or format, cut into 8 roughly equal pieces and arranged to form 3 rows in this pattern: BDC, EGF, AH. Obviously taking the first section A to the bottom along with H, then shuffling the last piece in each section with the middle like 1, 3, 2. So that's the format. Without any further ado, I'll start with section 1, reading the text from the cut page and defining what I can using online resources and etymologies. My citations are in the paper, so I won't spend too much time on all of that. We'll encounter some proper nouns here, don't worry about them, we'll get to that in step 2. Ticks. Mark cuts in the text. Barrett Davis, 1782 to 1854. Re-pro, and as proudly owe its early accomplishments, but as well, month is an example of the height it. History and the men who made the English sporting painters in lick of the period of our e-test. Surely Mount Vernon, Simb, painted about 1820, its colorful messenger of American pride, artistic accomplishments, is a full rendition of detail in nature, the people of Europe. Indeed, as in history and native culture, to whence of the 17th century, S. in his notes of Paris, this our French correspondent, Rye, H. Seine, Y. France, that produced Mount Vernon has occasioned month. The Paris edition of Morla, Constable, and Old, plenty among the visitors to the astonishment and admiration later artists. It offers a keen of them have been most surprised, colony position, and most older, yet in this it is unlike many, not only American art H story, and pleased to have discover S, which were painted alone for E forms and spirit of our colonial. But as well, the evidence that our artistic competence and content lie with E contemporary at of period were bound up so close, some subject in which he was only that, but that most of France under Louis XVI, as did the English, in the exca our neoclassic art originated the French. 13. Ions at Pompeii conducted B. Barrett Davis, 1782 to 1854, refers to Richard Barrett Davis, animal painter, son of huntsman to royal harriers, creator of numerous fox hunting pieces, such as Full Cry, featured on the cover of the August 1931 Antiquarian. Painted lots of horses and dogs hunting foxes, and horses riding after dogs hunting foxes, and so forth. Repro, reproduction proof. This is a proof of typeset material that is made as the result of a photographic process, proof of very good quality used for photographic reproduction to make a printing plate. And as proudly owe its early accomplishments, RLY, possible abbreviation for railway, it's used. It fits better than really accomplishments, or pronounced phonetically, early. But as well, month is an example of the height it. History and the men who made the English sporting painters in lick of the period of our e-test. Lick, license, similarly abbreviated, or leak, Old English dead body. Eatest, second person singular simple present indicative. Eatest thee of a burger, possible superlative, most eating. Found a specific meaning from Greek eta or eta, the name of the letter eta, ist. One who pronounces the Greek letter eta as e, not A. This was a point of contention to Erasmus in particular. It's settled now. To pronounce as E, elitist, is a thumb to the teeth from a fool in context. See Appendix Erasmus. Surely Mount Vernon, Simb. Sim, Greek same. The Greek prefix was altered to sim before B, M, and P, where we get symbiosis from, same. Painted about 1820, its colorful Y messenger of American pride. Y, French adverb y, there, or to there, il y a, used as a pronoun to replace an adverb phrase starting with a preposition. Artistic accomplishments is a full rendition of detail in nature. Hap, a person's lot, stroke of good or bad luck, serendipity, from Middle English hap, chance, hap, luck, fortune, happenstance. Connotation extends all the way back to Proto-Indo-European. Additionally, happer, Old French happer, to seize quickly, snap up, derives to hap, hook, the people of Europe. Indeed, as in history and native culture, to whence of the 17th century, S. in his notes of Paris, this our French correspondent, writ, Middle English from Proto-Indo-European, ri, to scratch, carve, engrave. H, sen, y. H, classical abbreviation, Latin hic, here. Common European abbreviation in the present for hour, Cent, French census, as in the census of Roman citizens, an assessment of their wealth, a fixed fee paid by landowners to the feudal lord, or an amount of tax an individual has to pay to be a voter or eligible for office, like a property tax. Alternatively, phonetically, you get cent, which is 100 in French. France that produced Mount Vernon has occasioned month. The Paris edition of Morla, Constable, and Old, plenty among the visitors to the astonishment and admiration. Old English, law, especially law of nature or God's law, the law, or AE, at the age of. You could use AE as apocope, something like admiration of later artists, though something more phonetically literal would be appropriate. Later artists. It offers a keen of them have been most surprised. Keen, a prolonged wail for a deceased person, from Irish cuin, to lament keen, or English to sharpen. I believe there's also an Irish connotation of shine or delicate, polished like a surface. Colony position, and most older, yet in this it is unlike many, not only American art H story, and pleased to have discover S, which were painted alone for E forms and spirit of our colonial, but as well, the evidence that our artistic competence and content lie with E contemporary at of period were bound up so close, some subject in which he was ought only that, but that most of France under Louis XVI, as did the English, in the exca. One could assume English is setting a voice without an L, and thus excala, as in Excalibur, would be exca. See appendix on Excalibur. Simplest reading is that the V is simply occluded, as though with an apostrophe, in which case we have X, Greek, out of, common usage, former. In regard to railways, X, the place the train originated from or called at prior to the present location. You have ca, Latin, abbreviation for circa. There are other connotations, but we'll deal with those later. Our neoclassic art originated the French. 13. Ions at Pompeii conducted B. 13 appears in the text transcribed in a circle, with ions may refer to aluminum with its 13 electrons. See appendix aluminum. So I'll read through section 1 again. This would be translation 2, and I'll substitute some of those words in for possible meanings. Down the line, we may go back on those, we may keep them and add to them. but we'll keep some of those in play where they make overwhelming sense, where multiple meanings or connotations converge. And in this reading, I will detail, similarly with footnotes or some longer appendices, the proper names, some of the concepts that are being introduced. Barrett Davis, 1782 to 1854, a reproduction proof, and as proudly of its railway accomplishments, but as well, month is an example of the height of it. History, and the men who made the English sporting painters, in license of the period of our Eatist. Surely Mount Vernon similar. Painted about 1820, it's colorfully messenger of American pride. Artistic accomplishments is an auspicious rendition of detail in nature. The people of Europe, indeed, as in history and native culture, to whence of the 17th century. E.S. in his notes from Paris, this our French correspondent writ. Now, E.S. is interesting. Couldn't find many E.S.'s, contemporary either to the period of the Antiquarian or the period that they're discussing, mid-1800s. But I did find 2 Edmund Spencers. Captain Edmund Spencer with a C wrote a contemporary text, Travels in France and Germany, around 1836. His birth and death dates are unknown. It wasn't terribly interesting. Edmund Spencer with an S, he's best known for writing The Faerie Queene, a very well-known poet in Tudor England, but that was the late 1500s. So not necessarily are either very relevant, but it's worth noting here in case it comes up. And a travelogue does come up because Notes from Paris, while it does correspond to an article that Comment and Correspondence refers to, another article in the Antiquarian, see Appendix A, but also a notable Notes from Paris that is contemporary is by a man called S., Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. A Tramp Abroad includes him tramping through mainly Germany and France, thus Paris Notes, an appendix, stuff that he cut in reference to reproduction proof. Twain worked as a printing press boy. Also, the page compositor was an invention developed by James W. Page between 1872 and 1888. It was designed to replace the human typesetter using a printing form with a mechanical arm. 3,000 were produced. They were found to be highly imprecise and soon outstripped by the linotypesetting machine, similar to what the reproduction proof would be used for later. Only one of these devices, the page compositor, remains at the Mark Twain Museum, because Mark Twain made a substantial investment, $300,000, roughly $8 million today, the bulk of his book profits, and a large portion of his wife's inheritance in this failed investment. It had no hope of working at the time. Our French correspondent writ, H. Sen. E. France, that produced Mount Vernon, has occasioned month the Paris edition of Morla, Constable, and Old. Morla, searching for this word, brought up Welsh for sea green, and a character from Michael Ende's fantasy epic, The Never-Ending Story. Morla is a vast turtle who resides in the Swamp of Sadness, extremely ancient and indifferent to worldly affairs. In this tale, the nearly as ancient empress of the domain measures her lifetime in names given to her by children who receive and continue the tale. When her name is close to disuse and being forgotten, thereby threatening the existence of the whole domain, she must be renamed in order to continue to live. This is related to the hero during his encounter with Morla. Constable, for one, is a major character in Shakespeare's Henry V, notably the Constable of France, Charles d'Abrès, who was appointed by Charles VI of France and was killed in the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, which is part of the whole subject of the Henry historical plays. Historical tradition holds that he was drowned in the mud due to the weight of his armor, being disabled by having his horse fall on him. Henry V died at Vincennes, where the replica of Mount Vernon was later constructed. As head of the English and French kingdoms, he was buried there. That was much later. In urtext, in our source text, it is a reference to John Constable, a romantic painter known in part for his highly realistic depictions of specific trees of various species, as opposed to just general trees. He painted actual trees that existed, which was a realist innovation. And then old. In the source text, it refers to, they do this a lot in art, sometimes they're related, sometimes distantly, but when everybody's referred to by their last names, you have to distinguish between them. So there's old chrome and new chrome. Old chrome in the source text, but we could extrapolate to other old artists like Richard Old, 1856 to 1932, known for his incredible number of finely detailed scale models of buildings. See why it's relevant to me. Or less likely, though fascinating with its connections that come up later, see our notes on Veda. Ashley George Old, 1913 to 2001, best known for harrowing works documenting the construction and human cost of the Thailand-Burma Railway and POWs of the area. Plenty among the visitors to the astonishment and admiration of later artists. It offers a keen of them whom have been most surprised by the colony position, and most older. Yet in this it is unlike. Many had not only American art history. Now, history is similarly abbreviated, contracted. There's no I, it's just H story. It happens to the word art also here, as with others that we've detailed. History and art being censored by removing a letter, maybe it's the times that we're living in. But looking at H story, it's a film by a Japanese auteur about his failure to remake a French auteur's film. There are themes of reactivity and reaction of art and intention, the effect of cuts or lack of continuity, there's replication and failure to replicate. H Story is a 2001 Japanese drama film by writer-director Nobuhiro Suwa. It is an autobiographical docufiction about an attempt to remake Alain Resnais's 1959 film Hiroshima Mon Amour. In French, just means Hiroshima, my love. The Japanese literal translation is 24-hour love affair. And for a lot of these, I'm quoting from Wikipedia or immediate sources because I have like 150 footnotes, so forgive me. And this is Hiroshima Mon Amour. Documents a series of intensely personal conversations, or one long conversation, over slightly more than a 24-hour period between an unnamed French actress and a Japanese architect. A series of close-ups of the backs and arms of a man and woman embracing amidst falling ash and then covered in sweat. In voiceover, the woman recounts the aftermath of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima that she has seen on her trip to the city, while newsreel and fictional footage of victims, protests, war memorials, and the streets and buildings of modern Hiroshima are shown. The man calmly says that the woman has not seen anything, nor does she know what it is to forget. He is from Hiroshima, and his family died in the bombing while he was off fighting in the war, and the woman is a French actress who is in the city to make an anti-war film. Later, back in the woman's hotel room, the architect knocks at the door. She lets him in and yells that she is already starting to forget him, but abruptly calms and says his name is Hiroshima. He responds that it is, and her name is Nevers, which is an area in France. The film was excluded from the official selection because of its sensitive subject matter of nuclear bombs and to avoid upsetting the U.S. government. The film went on to win the International Critics Prize. Many had not only American art history, and pleased to have discoveries, which were painted alone for E-forms and spirit of our colonial, but as well. 4 E-forms is interesting. The completion of words by one letter across cuts happens a lot in this section, you can see. So you get 4, F-O-R-E, form. You get 4 E-form. You get 4 form, like a pre-form. Also, this is the first of many instances of E as a possible prefix, like E-form, like email. There's lots of E's thrown to the wind here, and we have to take account of them at least at first. The evidence that our artistic competence and content lie with contemporary art of the period were bound up so close. Similarly, there are a lot of LYs that get cut off. This is one of several instances of lie as actually lie. Some subject in which he was only that. Literally, this is a case where it says, OT, only that. There are multiple cases here where we'll get an abbreviation and then be told what that abbreviation means. Some subject in which he was only that, but that most of France under Louis XVI, as did the English in the excava. Excava translates literally from Italian, former quarry. It leads us anecdotally to Government Island off of Virginia, the decommissioned quarry, now public park, from which the aqueous sandstone for Mount Vernon, the White House, the Capitol building, etc., were quarried. Our neoclassic art originated the French. 13 ions at Pompeii conducted B. See Appendix Aluminum. Conducted B relates to the formula for finding the electrical conductivity of an electrolyte solution. I think I barely passed chemistry in school, quoting, specific electrical conductivity sigma of a solution is equal to sigma equals Q times the sum of B positive plus B negative times the product of alpha and the N coefficient, where Q is the module of the ion charge, B positive plus B negative is the mobility of positively and negatively charged ions as a sum, coefficient N0 is the concentration of molecules of the dissolved substance, and alpha is the coefficient of dissociation. I think I got that right. And I think I understand generally what it means and how it relates. The process for extracting pure aluminum from aluminum oxide, or alum, and if we get into all the various uses of the word alum, we will be here all day. This process was discovered in 1886 by two chemists simultaneously, one American and the other French. The times that this has happened in science, you lose count. The Hall-Héroult process being electrolytic, or based on conversion of salts in molten solution. So you can see why I read that formula. Interestingly, alum was produced industrially via the Bayer process, though that was invented by an Austro-Hungarian chemist, not Herr Bayer, who changed his name from Bayer. Karl Bayer was educated in Heidelberg, which was the location of the Schloss Hotel described by Twain in Chapter 2 of A Tramp Abroad. That's the location of much of the action in Germany in that book. They spent a lot of time in Heidelberg. So yeah, that's coincidence, but it's interesting. I'm going to read from constellium.com, Aluminum Since Antiquity. This is from an aluminum company. There's somewhere else in this where we see that basically the only people responsible for the massive aluminum industry are like individual guys. I am the only man in the world that cares this much about aluminum, and now you have to care. It's funny. We'll talk about Severance soon, but there's a scene in Severance where somebody's trying to get hired in a company that I think they just make doors. It's like a specific kind of door or a specific kind of window. All the objects that we see in the world are kind of like that, or come from that kind of place. Anyway, reproduction. Humankind has used aluminum in one way or another as far back as ancient times, when the Greeks and Romans employed alum, an aluminum-based salt, for such things as tanning hides, dressing wounds, and fireproofing wood fortifications. But even though aluminum is Earth's third most abundant element, it took us centuries to come up with an inexpensive way to separate the pure metal from the compounds in which it naturally occurs. As a result, throughout much of history, aluminum was considered a precious metal. One account says that the Emperor Napoleon III threw a banquet where the most honored guests were given aluminum cutlery, while everyone else had to make do with gold. The breakthrough in refining aluminum came about in 1886 when two 22-year-old inventors working separately on different continents, Charles Hall in the US and Paul Héroult in France, figured out how to inexpensively extract aluminum from aluminum oxide, alumina, by using electrolysis. The two battled over patents for years, but ultimately became friends. Since 1886, 1 billion metric tons of the metal have been produced, of which 75% is still with us today. And that is from constellium.com/news/aluminium since antiquity 2020. Now, interestingly, and yes, we're spending quite a bit of time on aluminum. Now, the Pompeii excavation discussed in the original article, the plaster of Paris poured into the recesses in the ground, exposing the bodies. I saw that exhibition, I think, in London, or maybe it was in Paris. However, there's another wrinkle in this story that's recent. According to my absolute lay understanding of this March 2025 paper from Nature, which is our external Appendix D. I can't republish this paper, but I'll link to it. Analysis of materials from various stages of a construction site preserved in 79 CE Pompeii shows that a specific multi-stage chemical reaction likely took place within the Roman concrete, which gave it exceptional durability and strength. Now, that's been known for centuries, that Roman concrete, it's been speculated, and we've gotten closer to figuring out why exactly that happened. That reaction, in theory, hot mixing, quote, posits that quicklime was mixed directly with pozzolanic, that's volcanic, materials and water, initiating an exothermic reaction that significantly increased the temperature of the mortar mixture, sometimes exceeding 200 degrees Celsius. The formula being calcium oxide plus water yields calcium hydroxide, and apparently a lot of heat. Quote, it has been proposed that this calcium-rich solution reacts with pozzolanic material to form additional CaSH phases, and recrystallizes in the form of various polymorphs of calcium carbonate within cracks and pores during natural wetting and drying cycles, effectively functioning as a crack-filling mechanism. And CaSH stands for calcium aluminum silicate hydrate. It's a form of crystalline structures.
They're minerals.
All these very specific chemical states in process had to be met, managed, supplied, and then laid out. That's actually where we get construction from. We'll see that later, is to pour out or to heap up layers of this concrete mixture, which would then cure, in part made out of an aluminum oxide. So even back in the day, aluminum was in play at Pompeii. We could eat some hay, we just may, but look at all those ways, again, crystalline, it reaches into our text. We're going to take a short musical break. Okay. Mount Vernon as a ville to Americans abroad. Goodwill ambassador cubblessly conjures up the thou. Even if we do use much happier there today, where of the space on this page in other months to criticize our alti? He ved so well than 22 government for its frequent artistic missteps, we think the banks of the Potomac, it was a most intelligent thing, too, whose, to represent the unite, allow him only spring water. D states at the current Colonial Exhibition in Paris with a full. Nevertheless, we feel the size replica of Mount Vernon. There has been much discuss incidentally, concerning the and taste of the Cho, national past in as great se of our most prominent citizens, arguing that a recon representation of the unite struction of 150-year-old building is hardly that has chosen so fine fit a representative of the United States of today, with its nat for regret lies or lie, as our Ionial characteristics most plainly marked in terms of steel, coal, that so few of the furnace in wheat and cotton. It is precisely this commercial industrial were original. A surely inception, your country, however, as a prominent American pub, government to appeal suck, Isher has remarked, that we should attempt to balance, in the collectors, for the loan of boons of Europeans, with the conviction that the United States boasts not only of its modern. Section 2, Translation 1. Mount Vernon as a ville to Americans abroad. Goodwill ambassador cubblessly conjures up the thou. Even if we do use much happier there today. Toda, Spanish, all. Where of the space on this page in other months to criticize our alti. Alti. Unattributed online examples list one who subscribes to alternative medicine or lifestyles like goth or emo. I've never heard that. Maybe it gets used. Common nickname for river cryptid of southeastern U.S. See Appendix Altamaha. He ved so well than 22 government for its frequent artistic missteps. Ved, Spanish, second person plural imperative, ver, see, alternatively, clipping of vidi from Nadsat, that's Burgess, Clockwork Orange. Vidi is video, or to see. Nadsat is from Russian, at least in that instance, videt, to see. He plus ved, heaved, potentially, which comes from Middle English, heave, to lift. In this instance, you have multiple contexts, and that's partially just because of how language works. There's heavy visual there, heavier than lift. We may keep to lift, heave in the back of our minds. Maybe it will disappear, maybe it will come more to the fore as we read this passage again. We think the banks of the Potomac, it was a most intelligent thing, too. Whose to represent the unite. Whose. This is a disease of cattle affecting the lungs, caused by the presence of minute, hair-like worms on mucosal membranes. A Hoosier is unrelated, a resident of Indiana, demonym and partial epithet. See Appendix Vincennes, Indiana, because there is a Vincennes, Indiana, and also a Mount Vernon, Indiana. Allow him only spring water. D states at the current Colonial Exhibition in Paris. Youn, Y-O-U-N, but also Y-O-O-N and Y-U-N, a Korean surname translating to governor. With a full, nevertheless, we feel the size replica of Mount Vernon. There has been much discu, Latin, to resolve. Also, it's likely running along trends we've seen for that to just be discussion. We've been discussing that, or some other articulation of a contracted discussion, right? Incidentally, concerning the wom, Old English, that's W-O-M with the macron over the O. Old English, sound or noise. I look for that over other potential readings of it because you can translate that literally. It's W-O-M, and you just put that dash over the O, and you push that together, and you get the actual topography of that Old English word, wom. And taste of the cho, C-H-O-U-G-H, either of two species of bird in the crow family Corvidae. National past in as great. Great with an E on the end is just archaic. S-E of our most prominent citizens. Se, S-E, French third-person reflexive, reciprocal direct and indirect object pronoun, to himself, oneself, etc. It also orphans its E when followed by a vowel. Following the visual scheme of vom, derive S-E with the macron, se in Romagnol, which is sort of Italian, from a place called Villeneuve, that's Ville unite. Se is yes in Romagnol. In Latin, sic, meaning so we have lots of options for se. See appendix on ville for more on that ville unite. We'll come back to this one. That's a dense two-letter object. Arguing that a recon representation of the unite struction of a 150-year-old building. Struction, process of heaping, similar to construct. Comme struo, to heap up, pile, from Proto-Indo-European, strew, to spread out. If you've strewn your things all over the floor, that's very, very old. That's so cool. Is hardly a that has chosen so fine fit a representative of the United States of today, with its nat. Along colloquial trends, you could interpret it as knack with a swallowed final consonant. Natural, also nat, obviously with the G's, is a pest. For regret, lies, or lie. Pretty striking, directly appearing in text, especially with the recurring lie, ly, that we get throughout. It says lies or ly. Sufficient to say that any other appearance in this text of ly, especially cut off and placed somewhere else, you could just substitute lie. As our p-ionial characteristics, another place where I'm going to embarrass myself, pion or pi meson is a subatomic particle consisting of a quark and an antiquark, known as a meson, found before particle accelerators existed by Indian physicists, which I think is cool. India pops up again. Atomic nuclei are bound together from protons and neutrons, mediated by mesons, which are the diameter of roughly 1 femtometer, that is 10 to the negative 15. A pional relationship, therefore, if you want to take it kind of poetically, would be something like mediator or ambassador. Most plainly marked in terms of steel, coal, that so few of the furnace in wheat and cotton. It is precisely this commercial industrial were original. A surely inception, your country, however, separation of UR from O also implies like urtext or urfascism. It's also interesting that inception in the modern day has a different additional kind of meaning. Inception didn't used to connotate to dreams, but now it does. As a prominent American pub, government to appeal suck, Isher has remarked, Succor, from Middle English succor, help, encouragement, remedy, protection, goes back to Latin. Aid, assistance, relief given in distress. It has a military connotation. If you give aid in the form of equipment and soldiers, then you are giving aid and succor to the enemy, and that is even used in reference to King Henry in the Shakespeare plays. That goes back. But additionally, corruption of successor. You get succor and something else. My intuition leads to Fisher King from Isher, which is again duplicates and facades and things being called different things, supplanting. That's thematic. So succor, succisher, corruption of successor, it would fit. That we should attempt to balance in the collectors for the loan of re-boons of Europeans. Bund, a secondary enclosure, typically consisting of a wall or berm, which surrounds a tank or fluid handling mechanism intended to contain any spills or leaks. Embankment, from Hindustani, classical Persian. That's a very old word. That's cool. In context, you potentially have rebound or rebond, or you have Bund, league or confederacy. Come back to that. With the conviction that the United States boasts not only of its modern. Boast, a quote from our constable in Henry V, Act 3, Scene 7. Even as your horse bears your praises, who would trot as well were some of your brags dismounted. Modern, from French moderne, from Latin modo, measures to make certain, similar to metro from Greek, to mark, measure, as in metrokro. In Shakespeare, often with a sense of everyday, ordinary, commonplace, rather than like current. Interestingly enough, Samuel Clemens claimed his name from a riverboat term shouted upon measuring depth of the water. 12 feet, someone would yell, Mark Twain. Also from Henry V, in the same scene, Act 3, Scene 7, Messenger, My Lord High Constable, the English lie within 1,500 paces of your tents. Constable, who hath measured the ground? Mount Vernon as a ville to Americans abroad. I only now see the joke, a ville, evil. Goodwill ambassador cublessly conjures up the thou. Cubless has one notable usage which I could find, and that is in Byron's Don Juan. The cubless tigress in her jungle raging is dreadful to the shepherd and the flock. That's from Canto 3, 1821. Significances also jump from Canto 14, beginning with a ride to hound, and nearly ending with the aphorism that truth is stranger than fiction. It's funny how this magazine from 1931 was nostalgic for a period of writing and retrospection from the 1850s and 1870s, which was entirely tribute and tradition of aristocracy of the colonial period, and the time suck continues more tangentially backward with Spencer and Shakespeare, and yet our thrust forward into time is atomic. That's zircon if you're following that from me. This whole section, this is formatting similar to chapter headings in books like Travelogues by Edmund Spenser and Mark Twain, among many others. These dense preface paragraphs which are just not like the name of a chapter, but short phrases, descriptions of scenes that are going to happen there. You see that in A Tramp Abroad. It lends a bit of credence with the block letters beginning the article proper. Even in big block letters, being the first sentence below this italicized kind of separate headline, if you will. This happens twice to separate sections 2 and 3. You can see it in the cut page. Some natural formatting. Even if we do use much happier there toda, feels like a strange utilitarian interpretation of to be. Even if we used to be much happier there today, we are much happier becomes we do use much happier. It reduces things to this, like, I don't know if you've ever asked like a hardcore materialist how they're doing. Oh, things are good. Yes, I guess they are. Everything is pretty stable, isn't it? And of course that has the connotation of, even if we all used to be much happier there, even if we all use much happy there, where of the space on this page and other months to criticize our alti? I'm going to take another pass at alti, because if you take it in an accent and you slur it a bit, whereof the space on this page and other months to criticize oralty. Oralty just is a Freudian slip of a congressman, and I think I know who you are. I think everyone could guess one. It's a small world. What can I say? See Appendix Georgia, which is not that one. He's a different one. But is that right? Ladybug. Oh, that's South Carolina. He vetted so well, then 22 government for its frequent artistic missteps. He vetted so well, we talked about this before, to see in multiple contexts, but there's also an expression of visibility. Like, he played great on TV. He looks good. It's an image thing. He vetted so well, than, T-H-A-N. This happens in cut-ups sometimes where you can tell what's being said, but it's a truncated version, and English is almost the worst language for it. Stuff that you would experience translating out of other languages into English, where you kind of have to extrapolate things. It creates almost like a reverse broken English, where you have somebody that has vocabulary but doesn't have a total grasp of the fucked up English grammar that we have. Some of this stuff reads like that. So, well, then 22 government, well, what you really mean is better than. Vedi, in that case, being a term out of another language, right? It's an intersposed circumstance of a thought just not taking English form. 22 government sends me to catch 22. See the appendix. We think the banks of the Potomac, it was a most intelligent thing, too. Who's to represent the unite? Allow him only spring water. Footnote 55. Who's to represent the unite? Allow him only spring water? Implying the representative, whoever that is a sick cow. Like a demonym, like, oh, who's over there? He's going to be in charge? Theme of an official controlled by worms. Allow him only spring water takes us directly to the Potomac Sewage crisis of 2026 that is, depending on who you ask, ongoing. D-grade states at the current Colonial Exhibition in Paris with awful. Yoon Suk-yeol served as the 13th president of South Korea from 2022 until 2025, being removed from office and sentenced to life imprisonment for attempting an insurrection. Sentencing overlapped with the writing of this report, 19th February 2026. Exposition, spelled with an X for added racism, continuing the theme of superficial and nonsensical renaming, rebranding that does little to conceal seeping rot beneath. Poor copies and good copies, old and new. Nevertheless, we feel the size of the replica of Mount Vernon. There has been much to resolve, and incidentally, concerning the sound and taste of the crow. Awful, with a full, with awful, like carrion, like crow. The red-billed cho is featured on the Cornish coat of arms, stemming from a legend that King Arthur transformed into the bird upon death, thus bringing bad luck to anyone responsible for its death. To eat crow is an expression meaning to be humiliated after having taken a wrong position, dating to around the 1850s. Crow, being carrion birds, were traditionally viewed as unwholesome and even forbidden or humiliating to eat. For example, Leviticus 11. National past isn't as great to ourselves, of our most prominent citizens arguing that a recon representation of the unite destruction of a 150-year-old building is hardly so fine fit a representative of the United States of today, with its knack for regret, lies, as our nuclear mediative characteristics most plainly marked in terms of steel and coal, that so few of the furnace is in wheat and cotton. It is precisely this commercial industrial company which were original, assuredly inception of our country. However, as a prominent American pub, government to appeal successor has remarked that we should attempt to balance in them collectors for the loan of rebunds of Europeans, Bund, league or confederacy, as in Nazi-sympathizing American bunds. See Marshall Curry's documentary A Night at the Garden, 2017. Quick, before it becomes propaganda that's illegal to own. Garden refers to Madison Square, where American fascists rallied under a massive swastika and portrait of George Washington. 2 out of 2 NSAID reports have broken Godwin's law, master of the obvious, I guess. In context, this turn of phrase is extremely troubling. I do not appreciate that the German techno I was listening to during this session said Schwarzenstern, Black Star, in response to my side, Nazis, dude. As a prominent American pub has remarked, that we should attempt to balance in them collectors for the loan of rebunds of Europeans, with the conviction that the United States boasts not only of its modern. We'll be right back. If you've made it this far, wouldn't you mind taking a look around at our website? We've got some wonderful artwork for sale there by my partner and myself. There are links to all the documentation and the things that we do, and most importantly, if you found us through YouTube, we have about a decade's worth of monthly shows that aren't on YouTube. God knows nothing ever came out month to month. If you spread it all out, do some math, that's about right. We've got links to our Patreon and Ko-Fi in the description, and there's actually extra material from this report, and there's a lot of it, or maybe that'll be the subject for a monthly ramble. I like a good ramble. Despite all the things in the world, there's a lot on the horizon that is good, and I'm trying to be hopeful about that. If you appreciate this thing like that, I'll be making myself busy with expressions of gratitude. Persistent, consistent, effervescent, insistent, with a heart beating in my haunted little chest again. Seriously. Let's get back to the show. Appendix Ville. Now, I've got some extra notes on the naming conventions of colonial America, where we get town, burg, ville. It's more complicated than just kind of being random. So that's interesting, but I won't go into that here. However, ville unite, historically, quoting, means a large area of the province of Ravenna, Italy, bordering to the west with the homologated area called ville disunite, which I think is very funny. It derives its name from the fact that it is located south of the United Rivers, a stream formed by the confluence of the Ronco and the Montone rivers, bordered by the range formed to the west by the Strada Ravegana. Current SS 67 connects Pisa with Marina di Ravenna. Okay, so that's mildly interesting. Just the idea that there is a place called Ville Unite, both of those come into play here. That's funny, I guess. I know SS is foreboding. SS is Strada Stradale. It's state road. However, Ravenna takes us right into our next footnote. Cublously conjures up the thou. Lord Byron lived in Ravenna between 1819 and 1821. Here he continued Don Juan, likely Canto 3 among other material, and wrote Ravenna Diary, My Dictionary and Recollections. Ravenna is the capital city of the province of Ravenna, which is the province of the Emilia-Romagna region, whose capital is Bologna, so that's how I know where it is. I know where Bologna is, that's about all I know. It's northern-ish Italy. Ravenna actually served as the capital of the Western Roman Empire from 402 CE until the end of the empire in 476. Rome collapsed. I knew I recognized it from Peter of Ravenna, author of the mnemonic treatise Phoenixia Artificiosa Memoria, 1491, at the time, and continues to be an influential mnemonic text. Ravenna was the marshalling site of Caesar's forces before crossing the Rubicon. Quote, Ravenna was surrounded by swamps and marshes, and was perceived to be easily defensible, although in fact the city fell to opposing forces numerous times in its history. The city was damaged in a tremendous flood in May 1636. Over the next 300 years, a network of canals diverted nearby rivers and drained nearby swamps, thus reducing the possibility of flooding and creating a large belt of agricultural land around the city. And while we're at it, I'll read all of Canto 3, verse 58. The cubless tigress in her jungle raging is dreadful to the shepherd and the flock. The ocean when its yeasty war is waging is awful to the vessel near the rock. But violent things will sooner bear assuaging, their fury being spent by its own shock, than the stern, single, deep, and wordless ire of a strong human heart and in a sire. Let's talk about Alti. Altamahaha, champ, Onyarekoa, giant cryptid fish of American and indigenous folklore. A cryptid lake monster known by different names based on area and culture. Champy from Lake Champlain, which extends across New York, Vermont, and Quebec. There are multiple Iroquois legends about similar great water serpents, Onyare, Onyut, Donogaius, Uktena, Maneto, Opatenikin. I'm very sorry about all these pronunciations. I'm doing my best. There's Mussy from Muskrat Lake in Ontario. Memphrey from Lake Memphremagog, again from the Vermont-Quebec area. British Columbia and Pacific Northwest have their own. And obviously there's Nessie and other examples. There's examples from China, South America, Africa. But the outlier geographically seemed to be Altamahaha, a creature or spirit, depending on who you ask, located in Muskogee or Tama traditions, as far as I could find in my research. I've contacted the Lower Muskogee tribe of Georgia to inquire directly. There's a little bit of hearsay as to exactly what the reference is. There's a lot of news organizations quoting other news organizations and not quoting sources, which is great. In fact, the whole surrounding area of the Altamaha River have taken to the creature as a mascot, bringing along the common nickname Alti. So tack one on for appropriation, I guess. We're going to skip over to lake monsters now. Lake monster as related to scapegoating and political corruption, drain the swamp, etc., especially in relation to the slug. Another example of aquatic cryptids similar to Alti, the mugwump, derives its name for a misunderstanding of the Algonquin word for leader. Mugwump was also the name of an American political party of the late 19th century, which split off from the Republican Party of its time in response to rampant political corruption, though the word had been used since the 1830s to deride activists whose critics deemed them holier-than-thou, self-appointed leaders. Mark Twain self-identified as a mugwump in an essay from 1907. Parallels can be seen today in the Never Trumper movement within the Republican Party, for whatever that stands, and the derisive moniker they received in return from the rapacious beast-in-chief. Rhino, Republican in name only. Mugwumps make an appearance in Naked Lunch, grotesque caricature of how society views addicts, the addict's condition. Mugwumps have no liver and nourish themselves exclusively on sweets. Thin purple-blue lips cover a razor-sharp beak of black bone. These creatures secrete an addicting fluid from their erect penises, which prolongs life by slowing metabolism. Additionally, the song Lake Monsters from the 2018 They Might Be Giants album, I Like Fun, draws parallels between silent majority voters and the MAGA base, with a music video by Hine Mizushima that depicts a water cryptid, Lakeman, which has the following characteristics, which are spelled out in the video. A creature with crab-like claws, camouflage behavior, large white tentacles, feeds on lake snakes. Lake snakes, incidentally, being the suspected source of all of these, if you want to go materialist with it, all of these lake monster myths. They're all alligator gar or great sturgeon or stuff like that. Lakeman is weak to accidental self-harm by cutting off its dangling tentacles with its own claws. The song features lines such as, "Lake monsters of the USA, just looking for a polling station. If it takes the cloak of darkness, their voices will be counted." And, "You might be asking yourself what happened to this world, but they're not ashamed, they cannot be tamed." Or my favorite, "No hypnosis like a mass hypnosis, 'cause a mass hypnosis isn't happening." If we're going to look for a lake monster specifically, if that epithet had to be applied to an official from the state of Georgia, and if one should consider Marjorie Taylor Greene's heel turn on the GOP alienating enough to her to be virtually legitimate, which I think is the accurate reading of that, then the gaze falls pretty squarely on Doug Collins, former Georgia House and U.S. House Republican and current Secretary of Veterans Affairs. One should refer to Washington's little issue with troops affairs in the 1780s. Dougie boy, learn your history, you scum. Pick a Republican issue hostile to humanity, and he holds the extremist position on it. He ran for Senate in a special election in 2020, came in third, and whined like his daddy about fraud and cheating, leading to the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, a Republican, the one that refused to find 11,000 votes for the pedophile. He called Collins a liar and a charlatan, correctly, I think. Interestingly, while Who's is a more suitable nickname for RFK Jr., who is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the one with the brainworm damage situation. I mean, we weren't exactly burying the lead on that. Who's is an obvious reference, but who's to represent the Unite certainly applies well to Collins, who served as the Republican designated survivor, both in March of 2025 during the felon's address to Congress and during the 2026 State of the Union address on February 24th, which was the longest in American history for some reason. The designated survivor, for those who don't know or didn't see the whatever ABC series, when all the government leaders get together for an address like that, where you have all of Congress and all of the cabinet and all of the executive branch, somebody has to stay isolated and protected just in case something drastic happens. That is the designated survivor. Now, there's one for both parties. It's not just a Republican chosen by a Republican president, but come on. Yoon Suk-yeol, from Wikipedia. Under Yoon's tenure, South Korea underwent democratic backsliding and a shift towards authoritarianism. He received mostly low approval ratings as president and had been described as a lame duck. On 3rd December 2024, Yoon declared martial law, the first time it had been declared in South Korea since the military dictatorship of Chu Du-hwan in 1980. He accused members of the National Assembly of supporting North Korea, but lifted martial law after the Assembly passed an emergency motion nullifying the declaration a few hours later. Amid widespread criticism and mass protests, an impeachment motion was introduced against Yoon the next day, though it fell short of the 200 votes needed to pass. Yoon was successfully impeached and suspended from his presidential powers in a second vote 10 days later. From InTheseTimes.com, Kathy Choi. While Yoon was barricaded inside his home, his supporters waved U.S. flags and adopted Trump's Stop the Steal slogan to protest Yoon's impeachment. Yoon's own legal team cited the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on Trump's immunity from criminal prosecution to claim Yoon is similarly immune from charges. A few days after Yoon's arrest, his supporters stormed a courthouse in Seoul. They broke windows, blasted fire extinguishers, destroyed furniture, and attacked journalists. South Korean authorities arrested 90 people in connection with the violence. I'm sick of these fascist scum. Just thought I'd say that for the record, in case it wasn't obvious. Section 3, Translation 1. Full Cry by Richard. Mount Vernon at Vincennes doubt-deuced on the cover this right, that Washington might be far of excellence attained by might. Enjoy the Vinnius convivi. The early 19th century within the walls of the original, on hunt subject reflects in the cas vers, a noble experiment would end movement, the same inflatable. Netherlands and of 18 our readers will be stead to the more eclectic landscapes of has at least seen fit to organize our chrome. Like the works of the measure, as our present in the artistic pleasure, to the lay behead states to foreign countries, and contemporary sporting picturn, example as Mount Vernon. Cause the sportsman who cared less for his correspondent writes in the fact than for an actual record of G's shown at Colonial Exhibition, interested. It would have been easy for the S-fully to museums and private representative decorative art. AMF. Full Cry by Richard. Being the cover art for the Antiquarian, refers to a pack of hounds and their baying on the hunt. Full cry refers to being talkative or in uproar, full of anger or feeling. Mount Vernon at Vincennes, doubt-deuced. That refers to induction, just to be brief. Quotes on induction. Unlike deductive reasoning, such as mathematical induction, where conclusion is certain, given the premises are correct, inductive reasoning produces conclusions that are at best probable, given the premises provided. Doubt-deuced, one could see as Cartesian radical doubt. I must doubt everything that I think, and only therefore will I know when I remove all doubt about what I am assuming. René Descartes' whole thing. Doubt-deuced. On the cover, this right, that Washington might be far of excellence attained by might. Enjoy the Vinius convivi. Convivi as a clipping of the original text meaning conviviousness, festivity, but also here an inflection of the Spanish convivir, to cohabit. Basically a pun, like a toast, which could be taken as merriment or cynicism. Enjoy drink, enjoy cohabitation. In other words, you all can be here together, enjoy your company, make sure you drink up. This interpretation leaves aside, but may refract more broadly, the political idea set, capital C, convivialism. Ivan Ilyich, start with that, I suppose. I'm not going to get into Ivan Ilyich here. We're already quite long. The early 19th century within the walls of the original, on Hunt subject reflects in the ka, ver. Ver just comes from where with one V cut off. It's not a W, it's a double V. If one accepts the cut off W as a whole, you just take where as it stands. Ka ver into cavere, third person plural perfect active indicative of caveo, Latin, to guard, take caution, beware. So in the they took caution, right? On Hunt, subject reflects in the caver. You could also see, as before, ka, circa, where. A noble experiment would end movement, the same inflatable. I mean, I'll just own it on its face. We have billionaire technocrats talking about total surveillance, which will end all free movement, alongside talk of the AI bubble, as my interior cooling system activates. Netherlands, and of 18, our readers will be stead. I'm not sure what to make of Netherlands. I mean, geopolitical situation's completely different. One thing that did mildly stick out to me, the Kingdom of Netherlands, founded in 1815 after the defeat of Napoleon, plus 18 is 1833. You fast forward to 1833, then you get to the Treaty of Zonhoven. That was a treaty between the Netherlands and Belgium concerning open navigation of the rivers Scheldt and Meuse. 1833 was right in the middle of the Belgian Revolution. So if we're going with just general revolutionary vibes, fine. I just thought I would mention it. If you have a better suggestion for Netherlands and 18, I'd love to know about it. Stead, of course, being the place of a person or a thing as occupied by a successor or a substitute. The concept of an office. You hold an office. You are in charge. To the more eclectic landscapes of has at least seen fit. Off has, phonetically, is office. Seen fit to agonize our chrome. Again, if we're going by subtraction, antagonize and cognize kind of being similar words. Antagonism by knowing is something like a theme of our time. Old Crome in text, in urtext, is a reference to John Crome, the older, romantic landscape painter of the Norwich School, 1760s through 1820s. Alternatively, Crome refers to a garden or agricultural implement with 3 or 4 tines bent at right angles. We might call that a trowel here, a hand hoe. I'm not sure what. It's very regional. Nobody can really agree what to call it. That is like East Anglia is what they call it. Like the works of the measure, as our present in the artistic pleasure, to the lay behead states to foreign countries, and contemporary sporting picturn. Picturn, at least to me, I went, what does it sound familiar? Pitcairn? What is Pitcairn? Pitcairn Islands, downstream of a revolution, the landing place of the remainder of the crew of the HMS Bounty. Appendix. Quote, Pitcairn Islanders are descended primarily from 9 British HMS Bounty mutineers and 12 Tahitian women. In 2023, the territory had a permanent population of 35, making it the smallest territory in the world by number of permanent residents. Owing to the island's extreme isolation and small population, incidents of widespread sexual abuse went undetected until 1999, culminating in a high-profile sexual assault trial in 2004. And you might be wondering, well, that's weird. The Bounty was like decades and decades ago. Yeah, it was. Sex criminal island associated with mutiny and insurrection? That's weird. I did check if Prince Andrew's initials were AMF, and no, it's AMW. Example as Mount Vernon. cause the sportsman who cared less for his correspondent rights in the fact than for an actual record of G's shown at Colonial Exhibition interested. It would have been easy for the S fully to museums. I would have read one S fully differently than ESS fully. And private bore representative. The portmanteau of bore, resent, and representative is just kind of incredible to me, as is the crossing out the obscuring entirely of the words decorative art. And then there are several examples in this third section of words or phrases just forming really naturally across these cut lines. Doubt-deuced, right, it even rhymes. Caver, inflatable, off-has if you count it as office. The measure, behead states. I mean, if you want to talk about beheaded states and just relation to the last 20 years, you can pull up several examples. FARIS, far is correspondent, and then bore resentative, decorative art, AMF. I should mention the American Machine and Foundry Company, known after 70 as AMF. It's the only thing I could really find that was relevant on AMF, the initial signature at the end of the original article, Alfred M. Frankfurter. AMF, if you search it now, it's a bowling company. It's downstream from a much larger company that broke up. Quote, one of the United States' largest recreational equipment companies with diversified products as disparate as garden equipment, atomic reactors, and yachts. It became a major part of what would soon be referred to by U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower in a famous speech as the military-industrial complex after World War II. One vice chairman went on to direct the CIA for 3 years. It means nothing. It doesn't necessarily line up with other things in this text. I mean, honestly, I was just going to chalk it up to America, motherfucker. I don't know what it means. It doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. But if you have any ideas on what AMF might mean, I'm just going to say it ominously at the end of our performance, because I'm not sure what to do with it. We'll go ahead and get into the second review of this one because it's just pulling to be understood. Section 3, Translation 2. Full cry by Dick. This week, loyalist Richard Grinnell was ousted from his appointment overseeing the destruction of the Kennedy Performing Arts Center, a la the White House East Wing and the late friend of the show Kennedy-era Rose Garden, designed by Rachel Mellon. Mount Vernon at Vincennes, by doubt induced on the cover this right, that Washington might be far of excellence attained by might. Vincennes, Indiana, is the oldest continually inhabited settlement in Indiana, and one of the oldest west of the Appalachians, founded on buffalo trade. One can draw a direct line of movement from Vincennes to Mobile, Alabama, then capital of the Louisiana Territory, from Vincennes to Mobile to New France to New Orleans. Richard Mount Vernon at Vincennes has a certain Darmok about it, doesn't it? And of course, if you're going to talk about chrome, you have to talk about the ongoing atrocity in Florida. A center built in the 1960s as a deterrent missile base aimed at Cuba, so old chrome, and the death camp that is new chrome. Office at last seen fit to organize our chrome. Cause the sportsman who cared less for his correspondent rights in the fact than for an actual record of G's shown at a Colonial Exhibition. Recalls to this operator Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, ostensibly a sports assignment hijacked into a search for the American dream, spawning a million loose adrenochrome ravings. There's the pun of rights with a W and rights as relevant to his editors. Arguably, he covered the story. The Circus Circus is what the whole Hep world would be doing if the Nazis had won the war. Thompson, 71. Cut 2. CPAC. Another instance of truth as imitation by any other name would not be as gonzo as Raoul Duke. I was flipping through Fear and Loathing 72 on Waking yesterday, laughing at Humphrey. Analysis of Nixon's nomination. Boom, racial slur. I was like, oh. Just like Twain with his random hard R in an otherwise jovial chapter and a half about damn Blue Jays. Their old Kentucky home and whatnot, I guess. So, G's shown at a Colonial Exhibition as the scene writ large is not a far fling. Think of a private prison industry convention and the predominant attitude there. Come to think of it, in Vegas they do audit a seminar on dangerous drugs presented by a police union. The sportsman who cared less for his correspondent rights writes in the fact more than for an actual record of the reality of things. Colonial exhibitions, of course, featuring pavilions from exotic lands, which were, in essence, human zoos. This is a quote in reference to the Exhibition Universelle, which is what contributed to the building of the Eiffel Tower. In addition to the architectural displays of France's colonies, the exposition showcased a construction of villages inhabited by natives of the colonies to be observed by viewers, such as a village nègre, where 400 people were displayed. The colonized people had their daily lives displayed for the exposition visitors, which made some of them uncomfortable. Samba Lawe Thiam, a jeweler from Senegal who was part of the 1889 exposition, said the following: "We were very humiliated to be exhibited this way, in huts like savages. These straw and mud huts do not give an idea of Senegal. In Senegal we have large buildings, railroad stations, railroads. We light them with electricity. The Bureau of Hygiene does not tolerate the construction of this type of hovel. These existing ones that fall into disrepair are not replaced." We've got to do some appendix cleanup before we move forward. I've got to fill in some blanks here, historically. For one thing, let's just talk about Mount Vernon. Former residence and plantation owned by George Washington on the banks of the Potomac, in Fairfax County, Virginia, approximately 15 miles south of Washington, D.C. The Washington family acquired the land in 1674. At the time of the Smith expeditions, that's John Smith from the Pocahontas movie, Jamestown, about that time, the land was already occupied by Doeg people native to the area. The Doeg people no longer exist. The original house was built in stages beginning in 1734 by an architect whose identity remains in dispute. It could be a number of people, certainly a number of slaves, and we'll get back to that. Financed and supervised by Washington's father, Augustine. That's my middle name. The grounds feature ha-ha walls, or blind ditches, which precluded the view of the slave farms from the pleasure grounds, the gardens, and the guests. Washington died on December 14th, 1799. His will dictated that he be buried in a family crypt already built on the property. But at the time of his death, it was in poor condition, so it had to be rebuilt. This didn't happen until 1831, the year that the Turner Rebellion happened, that August. States had already been split into North and South along the 3630 parallel, in line with the Missouri Compromise, for like a decade. Slave states and free states coming in, Missouri, slave, Maine, free. The Turner Rebellion had happened to the tune of about 200 lives and any remaining rights for Southern slaves and free people. So pre-Civil War tension was really starting to escalate in the 1830s. 1832 saw a debate over the removal of Washington's body to the Capitol building, and Southerners put up a big fuss over it. Particularly Wiley Thompson of Georgia, best known for driving the Seminole out of Florida until resistance leader Osceola put him in the fucking ground. They captured Osceola with a fake truce flag on the way to peace talks. By the way, he died of malaria in captivity. Their argument was not that a removal was against Washington's will, which it was. That was a fact that they had, but they didn't use that. They didn't argue that. Their argument was, when there's a national split, for whatever reason, if that happens, then Washington's body would not be down south in Virginia, but, quote, on the shore, foreign to his native soil. Fucking idiots. Loser. Traitors. Interestingly, I didn't know that a solar eclipse in February, and potentially the eruption of a volcano in Sicily, which caused weird sky conditions, predicated the timing of the Nat Turner uprising. And I'm sorry for this. This is one of those times where, skip about a minute ahead, I suppose. He had planned for several years and organized slowly and thought it out, and then waited for divine signals to, quote, slay my enemies with their own weapons. Of course, it's impossible to know how many people were killed out of stupid terror and unleashed barbaric instinct by Southern whites in the aftermath. Who were ready to believe that caravans of armed slaves were massacring people and setting police stations on fire, marching on state capitals. After 2 weeks of ongoing wanton slaughter throughout the Southeast, states away from the actual rebellion that happened, a General Epps called for it to stop, and I guess that did it. They hanged Nat Turner and made his skin into souvenir purses. Speaking of Washington's slaves, not that Nat Turner was one of them, I'm quoting, in his will, written several months before his death in December 1799, George Washington left directions for the emancipation of all the slaves who belonged to him. Of the 317 slaves at Mount Vernon in 1799, a little less than half, 123 individuals, belonged to George Washington. Under the terms of his will, these slaves were to be set free upon Martha Washington's death. Martha signed a deed of manumission in December 1800. Abstracts of court records in Fairfax County, Virginia, record this transaction. The slaves received their freedom on January 1st, 1801. To join in the number of free people who would be terrorized, whose children would be terrorized, whose grandchildren would be terrorized, whose great-grandchildren would be terrorized, whose great-great-grandchildren would rise up and demand equal rights definitively, whose great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be raising their children to fight the culture that destroyed the planet. One can hope. Not to apologize for Washington by any fucking stretch. This was not to soften the picture, because I mentioned he owned a plantation. I just didn't want any hairs to be split over this. Let's talk about the Washington Monument. There were actually two of them. First was constructed in downtown Baltimore at the intersection of Mount Vernon Place and Washington Place. Thanks to the first lottery in Maryland, held in 1810, a competition was held. Robert Mills won in 1814 after proving to the Board of Managers that he was the first native-born American with architectural training, which may or may not have been a fact at all. The design was based on the Colonne Vendôme in the Place Internationale in Paris. Instead of a statue of Napoleon on top, the sculptor depicted Washington voluntarily resigning as commander-in-chief. The second monument, the one that we know, in 1833, a group of citizens formed the Washington National Monument Society, and this is around the time that they were debating his burial, as you remember. They raised funds, they held a competition, and in 1845 they chose Robert Mills again, who had just been named architect of all the public buildings for Washington. The cornerstone was laid in 1848, and they continued construction until donations ran out in 1854. Another MAGA precursor, the Know Nothing Party, I know, destroyed a memorial stone donated by Pope Pius IX because he was a Catholic. And eventually, the party took control of the Memorial Society and built like 4 feet onto what was already there using scraps that they found around the site. And then eventually the original society won out because the Know Nothing Party disintegrated, and then Congress took back over the effort in 1859 just to prevent any further fuckery. And then the Civil War happened, and at that point the obelisk was like a third of the proposed height of 555 feet. There's actually a quote that I don't have on hand of Mark Twain describing it as an ugly hollow chimney. He was disgusted that it was just left that way. Finally, in 1876, Congress appropriated funds to complete the project. Argument over design continued. They finally finished it in 1884, with the apex being laid on top. That apex was a 100-ounce pyramid made of aluminum, the largest single piece of cast aluminum at the time, which was extremely expensive at a price comparable to silver. The journal JOM 1995 gives the price comparison of $1 per ounce in 1884, which was equivalent to a full day's wage. The highest skilled stonework craftsman that worked on the monument overall was paid $2 a day. I'm not making fun of aluminum people, but I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about aluminum nerds, and here we are, bringing it all back around. Aluminum was not the first choice for the pyramid, nor did the choice involve any material design evaluation, extensive tests, or lengthy comparative competition among available materials. Instead, aluminum was selected as an alternative material during discussions between the engineer in charge of the project and William Frischmuth, the only U.S. aluminum producer at the time. Frischmuth proposed that the pyramid be made of aluminum at a quoted price of $75, and if he was unsuccessful in casting it in aluminum, he would cast it in aluminum bronze and plate it with gold for a total cost of $50, or if platinum plated, for $75. When Frischmuth submitted his bill for the aluminum pyramid, it was for $256.10. Keeping in mind that Frischmuth originally quoted $75 for the aluminum pyramid, it is understandable that Casey was quite upset. That's the man in charge on the behalf of the government. The capping ceremony of December 6, 1884, and the formal dedication of the monument on February 21st, 1885, were given front-page publicity in the nation's newspapers, and the aluminum point, or apex, was creditably described. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people who had never before even heard about aluminum now knew what it was. And that's quoting from, again, JOM, an aluminum industry journal. Thank you so much, folks, for your service. Virtually all quarry workers in D.C. that built these buildings were slaves. Historians debate the extent to which skilled laborers were enslaved. Some saying, oh, no, they were all skilled laborers, none of them could be slaves, which is incidentally what idiots say about the pyramids. But it stands to reason that a portion of these workers who built the lower section were slaves. The higher portions needed higher skilled polishing and placement work, it was more detailed, but who knows. But if you worked in a quarry in D.C., Virginia, any of the surrounding areas, you were a slave. We're going to jump from the period to the present and cover the Potomac Sewage Crisis of 2026, arguably the most prophetic part of this text. On January 19th, 2026, a section of the Potomac Interceptor sewer line collapsed, approximately 5 miles upstream of Washington, D.C. An estimated 300 million gallons of untreated wastewater was spilled into the Potomac River. According to the University of Maryland School of Public Health, the sewage spill is one of the largest in U.S. history. For MarylandMatters.org, February 16th, nearly a month later, Trump weighed in Monday saying that the federal government has no choice but to step in and address the problem. For once, a spokesperson said, Governor Wes Moore's administration may agree with the president. The federal government has no choice but to step in, because it's been responsible for years for oversight of the roughly 60-year-old pipe that ruptured. It falls under the jurisdiction of D.C. Water, an independent authority of the District of Columbia. Moussa, a spokesperson for Moore, pointed to Friday's briefing from Maryland lawmakers, which the Environmental Protection Agency declined on invitation to attend, saying its only plan was to set up a web page that summarizes our limited response actions and provides links to information from D.C. Water and Maryland Department of the Environment. The MDE does not regulate D.C. Water, but it does have a role to play in the cleanup, agency officials told lawmakers Friday, since the agency has purview over the river. March 9th, from the Riverkeeper Network. In the time since D.C. Water began to fully divert sewage from the failed Potomac Interceptor through a daylit portion of the C-70 canal, fecal bacteria sampling of a stream passing through a culvert underneath the impounded sewage suggests the possibility that sewage-contaminated water is actively discharging to the unnamed tributary of the Potomac River. Fecal bacteria-contaminated water may be polluting the tributary below. It also raises the prospect that planned remediation of the stream may fail if the source and extent of the potential contamination charges at the culvert are not controlled. March 13th, from Potomac.org. D.C. Water's latest water quality tests from March 8 show safe water conditions at all of its testing sites. A D.C. Water contractor is working with the U.S. EPA and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to remediate 2 of the 4 areas identified in their remediation plan. Work to restore the Potomac shoreline and the C&O Canal has not yet started. Remediation plans do not include impacted sites downstream. The greater Washington, D.C. area does not have a backup source for drinking water. March 24th, from Yahoo News. D.C. Water says large rocks and boulders used during the pipe's original construction in the 1960s blocked the line, causing an unusual overflow. A long-term $625 million project to repair and upgrade the system over the next 10 years was already planned. That's important to note. I'm not dragging the water authorities. This is both representative, indicative, metaphorical, and horrifying, and pretty fitting. Years ago, I wrote a little opera. It's a musical. I started writing these character songs about people who, for socio and political reasons, usually freely give up their agency for some kind of end that dooms them, and usually other people that have also done that unrelated to them. Something about control is controlled by its need to control. It was called Hypnocracy. It never came out, because it quit being funny, because it all came true. I took this cut up, carried it around for years, and put some of the words into the Greek chorus opening of this musical. Like the works of the measure, has the present in our artistic pleasure to lay behead states in foreign countries and contemporary sporting pictures. The opera would begin with this foreboding kind of invocation of fate. It would end with a bunch of wayward revolutionaries, all for personal reasons and not sound political ones, trying to destroy an opera house with explosives, with Guy Fawkes masks on because irony is not dead. Crouching in the sewers, they are subsumed by the river of shit that also sweeps away the greater part of Washington, D.C., leaving someone in charge, and God, give him a bottle of water. When I made a jokey song about having my avocados seized because I didn't have my passport at the grocery store, it was dark humor. I mean, it was informed by history. But that was 2015. I could list many more examples. It was a most intelligent thing. Having left out a whole number of weird details and other sources and interesting happenings and see all my appendices. If you recognize something, I read the whole section. If you don't recognize it at all, I didn't read any of it. We're now going to read through the text in a dramatic fashion. May God have mercy on us all. This artist, now he's a copy, but he's a good copy. He's a copy to go by. They're proud of him like, well, they're proud of the railroad, may we. This month is an example of the height of history and the men who think that they make it. Like our example, the English sporting painters felt that they had license in a rather indulgent time when all the academic debates were being settled for all time by the incorrect. Surely this house is very similar. Can anyone name this? Yes. Yes, that's right. Mount Vernon. Named for a guy completely unrelated to Washington. Colorfully painted about 1820. You can see it there. To a messenger of American pride and artistic accomplishments, it's a very lucky, it's fortunate rendition of detail over nature. The people of Europe, indeed, are to wince looking back from the 17th century, as in history and in how they handled native cultures. So we'll watch a clip from Notes from Paris, our French correspondent, right here. The lights. Okay.
Hours in France produced Mount Vernon. It's been an eventful month. It's like the Paris edition of Ancient Turtle, Your Granddad, and Old. It's mostly old folks here. To astonishment and admiration of the new artists, plenty of them wail and cry, the ones most surprised to see the colony depicted like this. But this is somewhat unique. Many, however, would not. They prefer only American art history and are pleased just fine with their discoveries, which are just painted models we put up in proper colonial spirit. May we? More evidence that our artistic competence and content lie with contemporary art of the period. We're bound up. Told to close it, the subject in which he was only most of France under Louis XVI. Like the English digging in holes in the ground, our neoclassic art originated the French. Like electricity made Roman concrete.
Tonight's headlines: Mount Vernon, revealed to Americans abroad. Ambassador's child detained. God will judge you. say we do use much happier on them. There, today. Would there be space on this page later, in other months, to criticize our own lake monster? He looks great on TV. That's better than the government in 22 with all those artistic missteps. And we think, the banks of the Potomac. Oh, great idea. Brilliant. We put the sick cowboy in charge. Only bottled water for worm brain, I guess. Democratic states are at the current Colonial Exhibition in Paris with a full statement.
Nevertheless, we feel the size replica of Mount Vernon. Feel it. There's been much discussion to resolve things.
By the way, with the cawing and the eating crow, okay, our country's past isn't so great to us. There are important people saying that taking historical house tours isn't a great look for U.S. representatives today, okay? Here's what we are great at. Regret, lying about our lies about nuclear deals. Like, it's so obvious. Like, in terms of our steel industry failing, in terms of our dependence on coal going up, like, we're barely shipping out any biggest exports. Like, our wheat and grain exports are down. Like, what the fuck? What is happening?
It is precisely this commercial industrial company which originally assured the inception of our country.
However, as the government begins appeal of his successor, a prominent American pub had this to say. We're trying to balance, okay? We're collecting on our loan of freedom to Europeans. We're calling it rebunding. We're just giving back what our own generosity kept away, and you should be thanking us. Because we have the conviction that the United States has better things than the past to boast about. We're very modern. Full Cry by Dick. Mount Vernon at Vincennes induced on the cover this right, that Washington might be far of excellence attained by might. Enjoy thy vinous convivi. The early 19th century within the walls of the original. On hunt, subject reflects cautiously. Where a noble experiment would end movement, the same inflatable, low lands, and of 18, our readers will be stead to the more eclectic landscapes. Office at last seen fit to organize our chrome, as works of that measure, as our present in artistic pleasure lay, as behead states to foreign countries, as for contemporary sporting, picture Mount Vernon, 'cause the sportsman who cares less for his correspondent writes in his fact better than an actual record of G's shown at a Colonial Exhibition. If they were interested, it would have been easy for them to fully assess your museums and private art collections. Ad mortum flagellas. Ad mortum flagellas. Ad mortum flagellas. Ad mortum flagellas.
The Earth Hotel is a production by Jackie Cotillard, the individual and named collaborators. All contents included are done so under fair use and with permission. The ideas and opinions expressed here not necessarily reflect those of Jackie Cotillard, the Earth Hotel, or associated parties, nor do they reflect those of guests or contributors prior or future. All music, words, and otherwise not cited as authored elsewhere are creations of Jackie Cotillard and remain the intellectual property thereof. Unauthorized use strictly prohibited. The Earth Hotel, all rights reserved, 2014, updated 2024.